I used to live within the old stone walls of a house, sheltering from the storms, securely tethered onto the earth in that exact spot. I could leave, but I could come back there. Now I do not live anywhere. I cause a daily headache to the system, partly an activist choice to not get stuck, glued to a space on the earth, and partly a finger up at the establishment. The UK does not like travellers. I know as I live as one. We move almost daily in our metal shell, an old builder's van to the untrained eye, and stop, explore, connect with nature and the people, then move on. Always moving on. The signs say quite blatantly that we are not welcome here. No overnight parking. And anxiety sits with me all the time. This being a pariah, for not living normatively. But I could be more normal, be human, be local, just live in a van. If parking, or being of no fixed abode, was not such a challenge to society. As a van dweller, someone who lives in a van as their main place of accommodation in continually changing locations, I find resolve in Shelley and Ura's understanding of dwelling in motion, and from Bell Hook's assertion that for richer households in the West, home is no longer one place, it is locations. Or like Uri argues, being on the move has become a way of life for many. It is my way of life. Using Bauman's metaphors for modern life, such as tourist, vagabond, nomad, helps to position the van dweller. Although they were written in separate entities, I see myself as a van-dwelling PhD student as fitting into many more than one category. For example, by living in a van, my home is constantly moving. My life could be seen as that of a vagabond, which Bauman describes as someone who knows that they won't stay in one place for long. And we don't, we move most nights. However, the vagabond can cast images of the down and out in the stratified consumer society. And I wonder, as I do not see myself as a down and out, if I can view my life to be one of a rich vagabond. As Bauman argues, those high up and low down are plotted in a society of consumers along the lines of mobility, the freedom to choose where to be. Those high up travel through life to their heart's content and pick and choose their destinations by the joys they offer. In my journals I responded. Reading Bauman's words makes me smile, as it reminds me directly of one of my life's mottos from my friend Chloe, to be able to spend at least a day, if not my whole life, following my highest excitement. To be fully present in each moment. What do I want to do next? Really, truly. Climb a mountain, read a book, jump naked into a woodland stream. I am a flowing, itinerant body, curious and moving, ebbing in and out of your locality, seen sometimes by a flicker of a light at my van window, but gone again in the morning. Not a pariah, but a rhizomatic flourishing, a nomadology of life, this interaction between the van, me, my body, nature, your static, yet never really static, existence. Realistically, is following my highest excitement fundamentally about privilege? What is true, who can be a van-dwelling PhD student is deeply connected to the ability to be mobile, and therefore to privilege. As Skeggs argues, mobility and control over mobility both reflect and reinforce power. Mobility is a resource to which not everyone has equal relationship. How many people really have the choice? That choice, as I pick and choose as a vagabond, van-dwelling PhD student. I may be on a low income, comparatively in the UK in 2018, under the living wage, but I am not destitute or homeless. I just choose, at present, to live an itinerant life, as I know it means I have more disposable income and freedom than renting a physically fixed room in a house, more possibilities to follow my highest excitement than stuck dreaming of time to do things. Itinerancy gave my PhD research extra depth, as I was able to stretch my money further, as through performing school tourism, I visited over 180 schools in 23 countries around the world. And the reader should not feel sorry for the van dweller, as it is also an activist choice. A place of privilege to resist the normativity of fixed home dwelling. I find solace in Bauman's words. If they are on the move, It is because staying at home, in a world made to measure of the tourist, is a humiliation and a drudgery. They are on the move because they have been pushed from behind, having been first spiritually uprooted from the place that holds no promise by a force of education or propulsion too powerful and often too mysterious to resist. They see their plight as everything but a manifestation of freedom. Other theorists have seen the vagabond or tourist as the nomad, where Braidotti describes the nomad as a dynamic and changing entity, or the mobility of the nomad as the nomadology from Deleuze and Guattari, and the nomadic subject, again Braidotti. The journey of the van-dwelling school tourist with aspects of the vagabond tourist nomad is not linear. It twists and turns, sometimes returning to a home location and other times not. Similar to Ingold's idea of the wayfarer or seafarer, the van-dwelling school tourist has no final destination for wherever they are, and so long as life goes on, there is somewhere further they can go. It could also be viewed, as Braidotti argues, as an unsettled dialogue between the ever-changing peripheral and its centre. The influence of Braidotti, Foucault, Derrida can be seen in the role of performing school tourism. Through sharing stories of educating differently, performing school tourism can destabilise, deconstruct, or subvert the dominant discourse of traditional mainstream education. Braidotti suggests it's possible to do this by seeing nomadic subjectivity, by identifying the lines of flight, a creative alternative space of becoming that would fall not between the mobile, immobile, the resident, the foreigner distinction, but within all these categories. The point is neither to dismiss nor to glorify the status of marginal alien others, but to find a more accurate, complex location for a transformation. Another way to understand this complexity is through rhizomatic theory and nomadology from Deleuze and Guattari. A van-dwelling school tourist can learn from Braidotti's emphasis on the mobility of the nomad, the need to fill gaps between how we live and how we represent to ourselves this lived existence in theoretical terms and discourses. The stories shared from and between schools, places of educating differently, could be used as ways to overcome the jet lag problem of being behind one's time, from Braidotti, which filling this gap with adequate figurations is therefore one of the greatest challenges of the present. Giroux's concept of cultural brokering is another way of viewing this role of storytelling, that sharing stories of educating differently connects and networks as it occurs as an iterative part of school tourism, as it bridges the gaps of known, unknown. It is important to be aware, though, that school tourism and van-dwelling vagabond living differ here from the nomadism argued by Bauman and Braidotti. Braidotti explains that the nomadism in question here refers to the kind of critical consciousness that resists settling into socially coded modes of thought and behaviour. Not all nomads are world travellers. Some of the greatest trips can take place without physically moving from one's habitat. Consciousness raising and the subversion of set conventions define the nomadic state, not the literal act of travelling. However, I argue that it is the literal act of travelling that is essential for school tourism, as it is an embodied spatial practice, following Uri's that virtual travel does not substitute corporeal travel. I recognise it is possible to use the internet to visit school websites, watch documentaries on particular schools, or read articles to be visiting the schools abstractly. However, it is not school tourism, as it misses the emotional aspect of the practice from Semblias, and as Braidotti also argues that embodied accounts illuminate and transform our knowledge of ourselves and the world. It is the visit itself, which could be seen as the nodal point, as Gale explains, where the latencies of emergence become manifest in nodal points in the flows of possibility of each new rhizomatic encounter. Following Uri's argument that people desire to know a place through encountering it directly, to be there for oneself is critical. Many places need to be seen for oneself to be experienced directly. Then school tourism is about these corporeal spatial visits as a further sense of co-presence, physically walking and seeing or touching or hearing or smelling a place. They evolve out of the embodied experience which provokes a waiting, a stilling, a listening for sympathy, says Manning, from which intuition develops as the relational movement through which the present begins to coexist with its futurity, with the equality of all manner of the not yet that lurks at the edges of actual experience. Performing school tourism is also a temporal practice. When physically in a school, place of learning, then following Wunderlich, One experiences place temporality by being in touch with the place, listening to its sounds and observing what is going on. Place temporality continues to be important as the stories that I share from particular school visits are connected to a time and place in the school place of learning's timeline and in the timeline of the school tourist, especially realising that place is not experienced in a similar manner by everyone. For place is both the content for practice as well as the product of practice, says Sharon. As a school tourist, it is also important to be aware of, as Enza argues, that places are always becoming, and a human, whether stationary or travelling, is one element in a sieving space, pulsing with intersecting trajectories and temporalities. I'm clear, though, that school tourism is not trying to create a rose-tinted view of research, as there are many aspects that could easily be overlooked. For example, the role of patriarchy and hierarchy in the schools that are visited, even knowing about a particular school or pedagogy. However, I argue that performing school tourism is one way of stepping away from current patriarchal educational patterns. As Braidotti says, nomadism is an invitation to disidentify ourselves from the sedentary, phallocentric monologism of philosophical thinking and to start cultivating the art of disloyalty, or rather that form of healthy disrespect for both academic and intellectual conventions that was inaugurated and propagated by the second feminist wave. Reading this idea of phallocentrism reinforced my awareness of something that I coined OHMs, old white men with privilege, which had been troubling me as I visited places that aimed to be educating differently. It also gave me the bravery to bring the concept of OHMs into my dialogue of study. I'm also aware of the term dwem, dead white European male. I used to think about the number of dead white European men, Deleuze, Guattari, who continue to influence the academy. Another point that needs to be raised about school tourism, particularly when visiting places in a different culture or country of your own, is a level of assumed hierarchy and potential colonial privilege. Stanley's work on voluntourism explores this further. Like backpacker tourism, she says, saving the world is one of the discourses among foreign teachers. This motivation type of helping carries overtones of the white man's burden, in which imperialism was justified as a noble purpose, in which Western expertise could help lift non-Western peoples out of poverty and ignorance. Learning from the work on mobilities has influenced the development of school tourism through the use of the concept of motility, defined as the manner in which an individual or group appropriates the field of possibilities relative to movement and uses them. Kaufman et al. Discuss a mobility capital, where different people have different levels of access to motility. For example, I've chosen to have a high level of motility and thereby live as a van dweller and travel the UK and abroad to visit many schools. However, many educators that I work with have a low level of motility as they are bound by contractual agreements to be in their own school throughout the year, so do not have the time to visit other places. As well as being aware of motility, I need to be aware of the power relations between the gazer and gaze within tourism performances, as I am able to choose to do something that other teachers in a school are not as likely to be able to do. Extending this further, I'm also aware of several important feminist critiques of nomadic theory that is grounded in masculine subjectivities and has made assumptions about freedom of movement and ignored the gendered production of space. The choice to perform rhizomatic school tourism takes a different approach from purely autoethnographic school tourism, in how the sections and experiences of each separate school visit or conversation are more fragmentary and less accountable to one person or view, a more diffractory experience. As if I've moved into post-qualitative approaches, particularly in terms of a rhizome, then it could be seen as the stories having agency, and that is this agentic realism of my multiple selves beyond my single I that have visited, interacted and shared other than body experiences rhizomatically together. This is the composting that occurs after an interaction, the new thoughts, feelings, smells and ways of looking at the world that have motion and emotion. The taking on and letting go of other ideas to decompose, nourishing existence both human and non-human. The agency of performing school tourism can allow for consent to be asked for a story to be shared, but once a story is told, it takes on its own agentic level of aliveness. It has potentiality, and those who share and those who tell do not have control of where it ends up, as whatever comes in contact with that story interacts with it from their own rhizomatic story of existence, its own nomadic inquiry in unexpected ways. I end as I began. Performing school tourism as identity or way of life, but with more depth, more insight, allowing the temporality of the embodied feeling journey to infiltrate into my inner being. And as the van dweller drives off on their next journey, they hope others performing school tourism will think with Blackie to pass your wisdom on. Think about telling your own story. No one experiences life as you do. You have a unique story, a unique set of experiences, a unique way of seeing the world. Tell that story. Use it to inspire and encourage others.
Move and shift, vagabond. The story